Last month, at a cabinet meeting, a photographer caught a clear shot of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's notepad. Neatly underlined under the heading "To Do" was a single instruction: buy Japanese yen, followed by the trade size, $5 to $10 billion. A few days later, the President of the United States publicly confirmed the administration had stepped in to support Japan's currency. He framed the intervention as an act of pure international goodwill, a favor to a financially weakening ally, cheerfully noting that we are always there for Japan, with the slight exception of Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Treasury actively lectures other nations to let free markets dictate currency values. Twice a year, they publish a formal watch list of countries whose currency practices merit close monitoring. Japan is currently on that list. For decades, the official position has been that grown-up economies let the market decide what their money is worth. The last time the American government ignored its own strict rules to step in and prop up the Japanese yen was back in 1998. Breaking a 26-year streak to aggressively buy a currency you're simultaneously investigating for manipulation suggests an urgency that the official friendship story cannot explain. When the Federal Reserve actually executed the trade on behalf of the Treasury, they didn't sell American dollars to buy the yen. They quietly dumped a mountain of European bonds to fund the purchase. They did this without informing Paris or Frankfurt. Senior European central bankers described it as a breach of central banking etiquette. Even the International Monetary Fund advises central banks against intervening in currencies that don't belong to them. The architect of this chaos, Scott Bessent, built his career alongside George Soros. He made his reputation by betting heavily against central banks and shorting currencies as they tried to maintain artificial exchange rates. When the chief financial steward of the United States adopts the tactics of a hedge fund speculator, he is reacting to a specific pressure point in the global system, one that forces him to abandon the Treasury's own rulebook. To find that pressure point, look at the gap in global interest rates. The Federal Reserve raised U.S. rates to fight inflation, making borrowing expensive. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan pinned its rates at near zero for years. This creates a loophole called a carry trade. Investors borrow yen in Tokyo for almost nothing, move that money across the globe, convert it into dollars, and park it in U.S. bonds paying 4%. They pocket the difference as a virtually risk-free profit. The global scale of this trade grew to over $4 trillion, larger than the entire economy of India. That immense one-way outward flow of capital crushed the exchange rate, sending the yen sliding toward a 40-year low against the dollar. Japan imports nearly all of its oil, natural gas, and raw materials. When the currency falls, the cost to keep the lights on and run factories goes up for everyone in Tokyo, regardless of whether they enjoyed the export boom. To stop their currency from falling further, the Bank of Japan has to buy its own yen back on the open market. To get the massive amounts of cash required, they have to sell off their largest liquid asset, a $1 trillion stockpile of U.S. Treasury bonds. That massive gap in interest rates transformed a Japanese currency problem into a loaded gun pointed directly at the American bond market. The U.S. Treasury is carrying record debt, and recently it has been funding its long-term obligations by issuing short-term bills that come due in a matter of months. Secretary Bessent is betting that the U.S. economy will cool and interest rates will drop soon. If he's right, he can roll those short-term bills over and lock in 30-year debt at a much cheaper rate later. But if Japan is forced to defend the yen by dumping tens of billions in U.S. treasuries, the market floods with supply. Bond prices drop, and yields, the interest rates the U.S. has to pay, shoot up, cracking the foundation of the Treasury's entire funding strategy. If those yields climb, the cost of borrowing cascades across the country. American mortgage rates rise, and the cost of the government's own debt becomes increasingly difficult to manage. This intervention acts as a taxpayer-funded shield, meant to prevent Japan from selling off its bonds and collapsing the Treasury's high-stakes bet on falling interest rates. Economists refer to this approach as cakeism. It is the belief that the U.S. can simultaneously maintain massive deficits, impose high tariffs on imports, and still enjoy cheap borrowing costs. Those high U.S. tariffs actively make Japanese exports more expensive, which weighs on the yen and forces it lower. The U.S. government is effectively spending billions of dollars to bail water out of a boat that its own trade policy is drilling holes into. You can see the market reacting to these contradictions in this graph of bond yields. The U.S. Treasury recently had to pay 5.22% to sell its 30-year bonds. That is the highest borrowing cost the American government has faced in a generation. For decades, global investors accepted a lower return on U.S. debt because it was considered the safest asset on Earth. That discount has vanished. The U.S. has issued so much debt that its bonds are no longer scarce or special. They are just another commodity. There is no easy way out of this trap. Either Japan raises its own interest rates to save the yen, or the U.S. structurally fixes its massive deficit. If neither happens, the bond market will eventually send both governments the bill. Despite the posturing of an untouchable superpower, the United States is now a heavily indebted borrower. Its stability depends entirely on foreign creditors deciding to keep buying its debt.